Hello ladies and gentlemen, Willie here. Well then, here we are, 10 days since the earliest possible opening for AQ40. Plenty of guilds and servers have had their chance to roll into this new raid and check it out. How has it held up against the test of time? And has this video I did a while back aged quite as poorly as I had a bad feeling that it may have? Well, okay, a little bit, but honestly, not in the way that I expected. Not at all. In fact, the challenge from AQ40 has come from places that I did not anticipate at all. So it's worth a mention that AQ is quite different from previous raid tiers that have been released in more ways than one. First of all, the war effort. There are plenty of servers which are still eagerly awaiting their time to get stuck into this new content, though by the time this video is out, I think we should have had a good sample size to go off as for progress in the new raid. Secondly, it has 3 optional bosses, the Silithid Royalty, Viscidus and Oro, so there is both the required bosses clear, up to and including Cthun, which is 6 bosses, and then a full 9 boss clear of the whole instance as well. Oh, and of course this video will be sort of spoilery as for the content inside AQ40. If you are going in totally new and you want to do so fresh, I really understand. Perhaps come back later after your first raid and see how you did compared to many other guilds performing early on. And I'll just give a quick mention to AQ20 as well. And yeah, it's sort of like ZG, but a little bit harder maybe. Bit of a loot pinata even if you go in blind for the most part. Super worth doing though, for the reputation, as well as getting the new class books, which are going to be mega expensive on the auction house for a good while. I thought that there was going to be a larger difficulty curve from Blackwing Lure to AQ than there was from Molten Core to Blackwing Lure, and it looks like this has been true. Here is a screenshot of worldwide Blackwing Lure progress from 10 days after launch, and I believe the main challenges prior to Blackwing Lure's release were expected to be Veilstraz, who was a notorious skill breaker back in vanilla, followed by Chromagus and Nefarian, which is really the first boss encounter that's going to last you quite a long time actually for many guilds, especially on your first clear. Here we can see 280 guilds progressing on Veil, Broodlord Lashlayer 420 guilds, Firemore, who ended up being the real boss of this instance, at 650 guilds progressing in week 1, and then things fall off for the other 2 Drakes before picking back up at Chromagus, and finally ending off in Nefarian. Just under 6,900 guilds had completed a clear, but of the other guilds who had downed Razorgore, that made up 2,400 in total, were still progressing. That's about 35% of guilds still in progress. Over 1/3 of guilds hadn't completed a full Blackwing Lure clear by halfway through the second reset, not quite as face roll as it was made out to be initially. So how does AQ40 stack up then? If we're looking at data as presented in Warcraft logs, it shows quite a different story. This is going as if the raid were linear, with progression as early as each boss is available to do. Unfortunately, there's no data on Prophet Scarum here, so we can't tell whether he was as much of the gatekeeper as expected, though to be honest he had about 500k health in total. That's equal to some bosses in Molten Core, and the clones seem to spawn with 10% of his current health, so as little as 30 to 40k in some instances, which is like a 5-man boss. The real danger of this encounter instead seemed to be that mind control effect he does, which caused players to do insane amounts of damage, but as long as you can fire off a CC fairly fast, there's not too much danger. In fact, much like back in the day in vanilla, if you're capable of getting Scarum down no problem, then most of the instance shouldn't be too much of an issue either. From here onwards, however, I think the data is a bit skewed, and not in order of how the bosses are. I just can't believe there are only 3 guilds progressing on Cthun at this point in time, which is what this says at the moment. So I'm going to do a bit more digging through Warcraft logs to get some more accurate information here. So instead of looking at the number of guilds progressing, we will look at the number of guilds who have completed a kill on each subsequent boss. I'll just check out Scarum out of interest too, since we're doing things this way now. And by the way, this is data from EU and NA. Worldwide data looks like a very similar distribution, just far bigger numbers. So as of doing this, there are 1,777 logged Scarum kills, quite a few indeed, hardly the gatekeeper looking at the overall data. Silithid Royalty is next with 1,538 kills logged. This is one of the 3 optional bosses. Battleguard Satura had 1,811 kills present and logged. Not entirely sure why there are more kills for some later bosses than Scarum. Your first kill is your progress rank per guild, even with multiple raid teams, so that's a bit strange. Either way, we'll just take it as it is and carry on. Thancris clocking in at 1,800 clears. Viscidus appearing to be the real final boss of the instance with 443 guilds, having landed a successful kill on the green blobby boy. He is the second optional boss. Huhuran not appearing to be the wall she was made out to be, with 1,705 guilds taking her down no problem. Twin Emperors appear to be the first real row bump for guilds progressing non-optional bosses, with 1,135 clears for EU and NA. It's a fight that quickly punishes loss of control and brings in a caster as a tank for the first time ever, so it's pretty interesting. Oro, the third and final boss, and the last boss to be taken down in this instance in vanilla, because he was bugged, having been taken out by 739 guilds, and finally Big Daddy Cthun being given a swift poke in the eye by 849 guilds. So I'm hoping this data is right. It does sound about right to me from what I've seen, what I've read, and what I've experienced personally in terms of difficulty. So let's break this down a bit more into numbers. So out of every guild that killed Scarum, only 63% made it past Twin Emperors, and less than half of the guilds, or 47%, who landed a kill on Scarum also did so on Cthun in the early opening days of AQ40. It turns out the optional bosses were the real challenge here, the bug trio not so much. However, only 42% of guilds who defeated Scarum could take out Oro initially, and just under 25%, or 3 out of 4 guilds, could not defeat Viscidus as of yet. Well now, looking back at our Blackwing lure data, which is hopefully more accurate since it is a linear raid, it had about 65% of guilds having a full clear just past the first reset. In AQ, just about half guilds setting foot inside the raid landed a clear on Cthun, and barely a quarter could complete a full clear of 9 out of 9 bosses. So maybe my AQ is going to be harder than anything yet video wasn't too far after all. And then there's the trash to mention too, aside from the bosses, which unfortunately we don't quite have the same levels of information for. It seems like many of the trash mobs were only threatening if you started hitting them without thinking about their abilities, and experienced leadership has a great help here, but assessing the correct target for a few seconds can save you a lot of potential reflect damage. The bug gauntlet before Fancris felt easier than the suppression room in Blackwing Lair, if I'm honest. The bugs had very little health and seemed to spawn even slower than the whelplings as well. I feel like 3 or 4 mages could probably solo the whole thing. The trash between Huhuran and Emperors, the Anubisaf defenders, which funnily enough had more health than Scarum did, proved to be the real danger points in the trash, more specifically the Meteor ability, which quickly wiped out non-stacked party members. Everything else they did didn't really feel overly impactful. The pre-Cthulhu trash was more of just a bit of an annoyance that slowed you down quite a bit. As long as you have warriors who bring along tank gear, pop on a shield and know what the taunt button does, they shouldn't be overly a problem. The biggest risk here, which happened to us, was a chain pull from one of the brainwashers that fear everyone nearby as they die. As for the big difficult bosses on our first clear, we struggled a bit on Oro, who was kind of just annoying because he reset threats so very frequently, and then follows it up with Sandblast, which is just an enormous 180% cone in front of him that does a lot of damage, and it CCs you. And we also had a little bit of learning with Viscidus. As mentioned earlier, it's a gimmick fight, and if you do the gimmick right, it should go down no problem. We did it about as well as you could possibly do it on our second attempt though. But that's what happens when you have 40 sapper charges to fire off into the blobs as they come together. It helps out quite a bit. We were running full world bus and consumes though, so no doubt this affected our kill times on many bosses. I've seen a few guilds attempt a zero nature resist Huhuran, which just doesn't seem worth the risk, especially if you still have world buffs at that point in time. Even with a greater nature resistance potion up, the first enrage volley will take that off and then some, and then the second one's probably going to kill you. Even with buffs up, it's best to just let melees play the meat shield roll with their nature resistance set and let the range blast it. Spread out well, she's barely got 1 mil health to get through, and only a small portion of that is the very dangerous enrage at the end. I personally didn't tank Emperors this week, but it went smoothly enough so long as the fire mages make sure they don't have a fat ignite rolling during when the twin teleport window happens, and healers keep pumping the heals. It's been fine enough. We were not running Master Demonologist on our locks and had about 145 to 160 Shadow Resist unbuffed, in case you're interested. Don't forget Demon Armor, Arthur's Gift, and maybe even Crystal Basilisk Spine for more Shadow Resist if you're a bit low. The Basilisk Spine does put Healthstone on cooldown though, by the way. Greater Frost Protection potions were nice for soaking a bit of the blizzard damage and letting healers focus on the tanks. The ranged boss can melee the Warlock tank if they get too close as well, so stay a little bit away. Finally, Cthun, the big boss, the old god, the guy giving you some nice encouraging whispers throughout the raid. How was that? Definitely a step up in a mechanical sense from honestly more or less anything we've seen in Classic in terms of personal responsibility and team coordination. In fact, it's been the first boss to introduce multiple different mechanics at the same time, and I can see for sure why this was such a challenge back in the day. Of course, we did have post-nerf Cthun, meaning that the tentacles that spawn had considerably less health than they would have had originally, which is where the whole mathematically impossible phrase comes from. I can't speak for every guild, but by this point we didn't have world buffs anymore, just consumes, and we still managed to get them down pretty fast. But at any time, just one badly placed I-beam could have wiped off multiple members of your team at a moment's notice, so the fight definitely keeps you on your toes still. Also, it's worth a mention that AQ40 was not PTR tested for some reason, despite AQ20 being so, and off the back of that lack of testing, we launched with 2 inconsistencies in the raid: Cthun not instantly firing off I-beam the second somebody peeks his room, and Frost Wands not counting as a frost attack on Viscidus, which made it even harder early on. I can get not wanting to test it to sort of build up the hype a little bit, but honestly, top guilds are going to pop in, decimate the content, and then do a surprised Pikachu face. Wow, that was easy, no matter what. So yeah, might as well just get it tested by people who understand the content well, so that everybody can get a release where it's working as intended. That's it though. If you haven't opened the gates yet, hopefully it will come sooner rather than later for you. Those still progressing, best of luck. Cthun has an amazing loot table for every class. As for what's next, well, Naxxramas still looms ominously on the horizon. This was the first raid where Blizzard finally started incorporating the fact that they expected players to be using consumables throughout the duration of the raid, especially on certain fights. So I'm expecting a bit more of a steeper difficulty curve than we have seen from Blackwing Lure to AQ. Or maybe it's just so commonplace for this excessive level of preparation now that it's just going to go down no problem and be similar to AQ. 65% of guilds landed a clear on Nefarian in week 1. About 50% took out the old god Cthun in week 1. How many will defeat Kel'Thuzad? I'm going to continue the trend here and take another 15% and guess about 35% of guilds that complete one boss in Naxxramas will also have defeated Kel'Thuzad in week 1. Time will tell. Let me know what you think and how AQ has been for you and your guild. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one very soon. If you like what you see, do give the video a like and subscribe, as there will be plenty more to come. Take care guys, and I'll see you in the next one very soon.